This is a moment of truth from the CFP Youth. Today's episode will be a debate hosted by Matthew Youth Wing co-chair. We will be debating, should Canada lower the corporate tax rate to attract investment?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this CFP Youth debate. Today, we will be debating Canada should lower corporate taxes to attract investment. The proponents of this stance are Rob and Alistair. The opponents are Joshua and Nathan. The format for this debate will be as follows. There will be 4 minutes for a proponent opening speech, 6 minutes for the opponents to cross-examine the proponents, 4 minutes for the opponents to make an opening speech, 6 minutes for the proponents to cross-examine the opponents, 5-minute rebuttal by the opponent, 5-minute rebuttal by the proponent, a 14-minute question period and open debate, 4-minute closing by the opponent, and then 4-minute closing by the proponent. And as we will be debating in teams, the teams can decide themselves on how to split their time. And with that, I think we can get started with the 4-minute opening speech from the proponents.
Perfect. I'll kick us off. Canada doesn't have a productivity problem. It has an investment problem. Over the last decade, Canada's business investment per worker has fallen behind the US by nearly 40%. We're working harder, but producing less because companies aren't investing here the way they used to. The global economy is competitive. Investors choose where to build factories, data centers, and research labs based on expected returns, and tax rates directly affect those returns. Our combined corporate tax rate sits around 26.5% compared to 21% in the US, 19% in the UK, and 15% in Ireland. Even within the G7, we're now at the higher end. Every percentage point matters. Lowering corporate tax sends a clear signal that Canada is open for business again, a place to invest, build, and grow. Critics say that tax cuts reduce government revenue, but history says otherwise. Between 2000 and 2012, Canada cut its corporate tax rate nearly in half, from 28% to 15%. During that time, business investment per worker rose by nearly 40%. Corporate revenues as a share of GDP stayed stable, and unemployment fell. The tax cuts paid for themselves through growth. A lower rate encourages expansion, reinvestment. When companies buy machinery or build facilities, workers benefit, not just executives. Today's investment decisions involve high-tech and green industries. These sectors are extremely mobile. They go where the climate is best for business. If Canada wants electric vehicle plants, semiconductor fabs, or AI research hubs, we must match the incentives others offer. Lowering the corporate tax rate doesn't mean lowering standards. It means competing smartly. Lower taxes means higher investment, stronger wages, and a more resilient economy. Let's give Canada a competitive edge, because without investment, there's no prosperity to share. And I'll pass it on to Alistair.
I feel like Canada has had a lot of missed opportunities over the years in terms of like companies and corporations. BlackBerry, we kind of failed BlackBerry, and I feel like we're not attracting competition as much as we should be. Like Rob said, our tax rate is a lot higher than other countries, the US, UK, Ireland. So there's no reason really for companies to come here if the tax rate is so high. And I feel like, we got to change that.
We are now moving on to the 6-minute opponent cross-examination, in which the opponents may question the proponents on their position.
Cool. So, Robert, is the investment problem in Canada solely a tax-centric issue?
No, I do not believe that it's solely a tax issue. I think that it is a combination of 3 main factors. It is tax, it is labor, and then it is the ability to create a financial model that supports those 2 things. And so I think having a lower corporate tax rate is a key point, because you need to be competitive. When our lower neighbor has a better tax rate than we do, and 10 times the labor that we do, we're losing on both fronts.
What do you mean by a supporting financial model?
So you need to have a model that supports using the money gained from a larger amount of foreign investment at a lower tax rate to support in-country investments. So something like a Crown investment fund is something that we should do, but we have to make that money from foreign investment that we're currently not getting at all because our taxes are so high.
Would you think that increasing financial benefits for countries or companies already operating in Canada is a worse idea in comparison to attracting foreign investment?
I don't think it's a worse idea. I think it's something that has to be done like at the same time as foreign investment, because we don't have the capital to do so currently without foreign investment.
Do you think domestic finance, and this kind of riffs off my already asked question, do you think financial incentives done smartly in Canada is going to be more effective than attracting foreign financial investment?
I do not. I think that there is significantly more capital in all of the foreign markets combined compared to Canada. I don't think that we have enough inbred capital in our own country to create the kind of GDP raises that we need to maintain economic feasibility.
Cool. And given that the world is currently investing trillions of dollars into AI and AI technology, do you think that it's on your statement of, tax breaks benefiting workers as well, given that it's a very low employee sort of industry that may be heading towards a very large financial bubble and that has a lot of moral and ethical issues attached to it? Do you think we need a greater AI investment in Canada, or do we need to sort of hedge our investments and plan for all realities?
I think that corporate tax rates, as they compare to AI, I think that corporate tax minuses and lowering the corporate tax rates benefits AI companies, yes, but I think it benefits all companies coming to Canada. If we lower the corporate tax rates and foreign AI companies are the ones that come here, well, at least somebody's coming here and investing in Canada. That's better than the current very few companies that are doing so. And the only ones that are doing so are coming in and taking our natural resources.
Cool. Thank you. I'll pass it over to Nathan.
Great. Thank you. So continuing on tax breaks, I'm curious, how would you see that tax breaks would benefit the worker rather than just going into a transnational corporation's pocket and just disappearing offshore?
Absolutely. So many studies, especially by the OECD, have found that higher corporate taxes actually punish workers, not the corporations themselves, because higher corporate taxes are passed on to lower wages for employees. And also, when there's higher corporate taxes, less facilities that benefit employees are built. And so when there's lower corporate taxes, corporations have more money to pay their employees with and to build facilities that benefit their employees.
All right. And my second for either you or Alistair is, we support corporations with lower tax rates or subsidies, so on. How do we prevent them from just leaving right after, as we see in the case of Stellantis?
I feel like if you provide them, enough ground and not resources, but enough, opportunities to build, they won't leave, and they might expand, into other countries.
Yeah, and I want to add on to that too. Something that we did during the 2000 to 2012 period, where we previously lowered corporate taxes, is that we tied some of the tax lowerings for certain companies to guarantees that they'll stay in Canada. And so we can do the same here. We can lower corporate taxes for certain companies that have large investments that they're going to make, and make them sign contracts that have obligations that they maintain Canadian-based operations for X amount of time.
Great. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Alistair.
Now we will move on to an opening speech from the opponents for 4 minutes.
Okay, so we should not be lowering corporate taxes for a couple of reasons. My first reason is that we lose $15 billion a year in federal tax revenue to tax loopholes. And about $600 to $700 billion of value worth of assets are hidden in offshore accounts in total. And so why would we lower taxes that A, reduce government income right off the bat, just inherently from that, but then also B, we also lose an incredible amount of money anyway due to tax loopholes. Second thing is, we don't need foreign ownership of Canadian projects. For example, the new Kitimat LNG project, that has no Canadian based companies invested in that at all. It's owned by Shell, 40%, which is UK and the Netherlands. Petronas by 25%, which is a Malaysian oil company. PetroChina, which in the name is a Chinese company that owns 15%. Mitsubishi also owns 15% of that. And then the Korea Gas Corporation owns about 5%. So we have a massive national interest project that's completely owned by foreign companies, and that's a pretty consistent trend. And the last thing is that if we want more, inherent built into Canadian business growth, there are better ways to incentivize industries rather than just like lowering taxes. And I know this term's been thrown around a lot in 2025, but potentially tariffs on certain items and industries, import and export restrictions, and then financial incentives that can look like state loans, financial grants, in-kind grants, trade finance, loan guarantees, capital injections, and equity stakes, and then like 20 other things that might look like. So taxes are not sort of the be-all, end-all when it comes to, promoting business. I'll pass it over to Nathan.
Thanks, Joshua. You're absolutely correct with all you've said. I just want to say our corporate tax has never been lower in the post-war period of Canadian history. In the 1950s, in the golden age of Canadian industry, it was the federal tax rate was at 47%. By 1980, when we started to see NAFTA, free trade, globalization occur, it's far down as 36%. By 1990, it's 28%. Now it's at about 26%, 15% being federal and the rest being provincial, depending on province. It's comparable to France and Britain at 25%, Germany, Australia, and Japan, and Mexico at 30%, which is quite higher, and only 4% higher, 5% higher than the USA. And despite our ever decreasing taxation, businesses have been leaving Canada in droves for the past decades, and we aren't seeing steady amounts of investment to replace that. Now we're seeing a decrease in funding to social programs that cause Canadians to suffer, which in turn leads them to have less satisfaction in our democracy. So I would argue we need to create a sovereign wealth fund or a national investment bank to provide natural investment. We can fund these wealth funds or investment banks through revamping crown corporations in the fields of natural resources, infrastructure, etc., and through extracting royalties. You can also increase free trade with Europe, Commonwealth countries, our partners in East Asia, reduce red tape, highlight our stability over America to the south, and even improve infrastructure, which is one of our most costly problems.
Okay, we will now move on to a 6-minute cross-examination by the proponents, in which the proponents can question the opponents.
Okay. If Canada's investment gap with the US is widening while our taxes are already higher, what evidence suggests keeping our tax rates high will lower that gap?
It's not just a tax thing. The United States has very business-friendly tax laws, and just like business laws in general that make it really, really easy to operate in the United States, and then also reap as much profit as you can to the detriment of every single American. So, the correlation between higher investment, but then also like public benefit is totally out of whack. So the question assumes a relationship between the two, or that just like taxes in and of themselves are like the sole solution to that problem, which it isn't. Does that answer your question?
If lowering taxes increases private investment and creates thousands of new jobs, isn't it a more ethical policy than keeping rates high for a political point?
So if taxes increase private investment that creates thousands of jobs, it's the right thing to do because it's ethically positive. Okay. Man, I hate to make this argument again, but there's more things that we can do to increase business in Canada and increase GDP growth. Like taxes are not the end of the be all end all. And I know I've said that before, and I hate to say it again. I wish I had a better argument, but it is the best one. But then also like tax revenue benefits all Canadians. So wouldn't it also be ethical to keep our tax rates high, at the same, if not higher, to benefit everybody instead of, just a handful of individuals?
So I hear you. There's many situations where reducing taxes actually doubled or tripled revenue for a country. It happened in Australia, it happened in Sweden, and it actually did happen in Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall when they dropped from 50% to 30%. So typically lowering the corporate tax rate actually increases corporate tax revenue.
There are also like dozens and dozens of other factors at play there. Like when the Berlin Wall fell, Germany reunited. right? And then it became a democracy, and they had a whole slew of other legislation and laws that went along with trying to increase business in Germany. So yeah, of course, dropping it from 50%, which is really high, was a half all the money, right? To whatever it is now, probably definitely did have a positive effect, but it's not the be all end all.
Now, to either of you, what do you guys think of Canada already being on the high negative side of Laffer's curve, which is an economic tool used by economists to determine corporate taxation?
I don't know anything about Laffer's curve. I'll defer to Nathan.
Yeah, I'm not an economic expert by any stretch, so I don't really have a good answer to that.
Pretty much, it's a curve that is a parabola that shows how corporate tax revenues are impacted by corporate tax rates. And once you get to a certain point, it's different for every country, but once you get to a certain point, increasing the tax rate actually lowers corporate tax revenue because it stagnates growth. Canada is already on the downward side of the parabola because of our tax rates, because based on our economy. So according to Laffer's curve, which is a widely used economic tool, we should lower our tax rate to achieve better growth.
In the short and medium term, it's more detrimental to Canada to lose the income tax from corporations. Right now, our social programs are on the verge of collapse. Our military is in desperate need of spending in the now. And it'll take significant time for, even after we lower the tax rate, for that money to flow in. And then for the industries to be set up. It's a chicken and the egg scenario, I guess. Yes, we should try and make Canada more attractive by lowering our tax rate, I guess, but it also hurts Canadians in the now. Josh,
I'll add to that as well. It's like, what are we trying to prioritize here? Like, fine, GDP growth is like the be all end all statistic for, a country's increase in wealth, but how that's distributed is way more important and totally never talked about, at least that I find. So it's like, what are we trying to do here? Trying to create more value for the companies that really don't pay, and you're trying to argue for them to pay less back into the country that gave them the opportunity to grow, or are we trying to create a country and an economic system that benefits everybody more? You know what I mean? Like, to Nathan's point, we're losing money, or like, we're not losing money, but the funds available for our social programs and our military and all the other things that require our government to function, we're losing that. Large is due to like loss in tax revenue, but I'm sure there's a lot of other things involved in that as well. But I guess my point is, like, what are we trying to prioritize? Like, at the end of the day, corporations are making more money, but shouldn't we also be spreading that wealth around and making life easier to live for Canadians? So, like, what's our priority here?
And now for a rebuttal by the opponents.
So there's a couple points I'd like to bring up. The investment problem in Canada, is that a tax-centric issue? I don't know the answer to that, but I think we can all agree that business in Canada revolves more around, or isn't solely revolving around just taxes. There's a lot more factors in financial movement in play, and that's an oversimplification. The U.S. is kind of hailed as like this perfect country for business, even though it actually isn't. But even if it is close, which it kind of is, it's only 5% tax difference between Canada and the United States. And like, yeah, sure, fine, that can, add up to hundreds of millions of dollars, but in theory, that's not a large difference, in my opinion. A lot of the industries that have been growing various economies in the world, and I'll use the United States as an example because that's the only really data set that I have. Their overall GDP growth was on track, pretty decent. But outside of AI growth and AI investment and data centers and all the software and technology, their only real GDP growth was 1%. And that's a pretty big number of AI, just pure AI growth. And so if we're looking for AI investment in Canada, there's a lot of concerns around that being a huge bubble. So are we really going to try to invest in an industry? And this is just talking about AI. I'm not talking about any other industries that has the potential to wipe trillions of dollars off the international market. And also your point about tax breaks benefit the worker, not just executives in the company and all that other stuff. In some cases, that might be true for industries that require a high amount of employees. But again, AI, does not really require a huge workforce to maintain. You need only a couple dozen, IT workers and software engineers to actually maintain the data centers. And so that's kind of where the world's kind of trying to go in terms of technology and new markets is AI. So when we talk about we need to lower the taxes to increase foreign investment, the current world trend is to AI, and then there's huge risks with that being a bubble. There isn't a whole lot of employees to benefit from tax breaks. And then, of course, all the moral and ethical sort of issues with AI. And I'll pass it over to Nathan.
Great. Thanks, Joshua. Our tax rate, corporate tax rate, is 26%, as Rob correctly points out. However, countries that see far more investment than we do, such as Germany, Japan, Mexico, Australia, all have around 30%, which is a fair bit more. Germany and Japan, for example, are some of the world's premier industrial powerhouses, and they get a lot of investment because of that, despite having a significantly larger corporate tax rate than we do. So I would question how impactful the corporate tax rate is to attracting investment, as I'm not sure. It's not a good metric. In the past 30 years, we've decreased our corporate tax rate by 20%, nearly 30, since the 1980s under Mulroney. And we've lost industry. Our investment in Canada has decreased, all despite drastically reducing our corporate tax rate. Secondly, to replace where we're not getting corporate tax rate, I would suggest either creation of a sovereign wealth fund or a national crown corporation investment bank, which can fill the role for corporate investment, as we don't have the economic, or the government doesn't have the ability to lose corporate tax rate. Our deficit is blossoming. Our social services are decreasing. Our military is in a terrible state. We need the corporate taxes right now. So if that means we lose out on investments from companies, so be it. Let's create a Canadian crown corporation that can fill in the gaps and help invest in Canada.
So we will now move on to the 5-minute rebuttal by the proponents.
My opponents treat corporate taxation like it's a moral issue, but I treat it like it's an economic one. The real question is, what policy produces more growth, investment, and prosperity for Canadians? History shows that moderate tax cuts expand investment without reducing revenue. The 2000 and 2012 corporate tax reductions proved it. Our effective tax rate fell by nearly half, but revenue stayed at around 3% of GDP. The OECD, IMF, and even our Department of Finance agree corporate taxes are among the most harmful to growth and fall disproportionately on workers through lower wages. Keeping them high means punishing labor, not capital. Canada is not operating in isolation. When the US, UK, and Asia lower their taxes and Canada doesn't, we lose the race for capital, and once investment leaves, it rarely comes back. We don't have to choose between strong social programs and a strong economy. We fund one through the other. A smart, targeted reduction expands both. The opposition offers fairness in theory, but we offer opportunity in practice. And I'll pass it on to Alistair.
I think it was Joshua that said AI isn't a good idea for Canada.
Plus or minus.
And I just want to kind of expand on that. I think AI is great. I think we should be focusing on AI and quantum computing. AI especially because we have a lot of cheap flat land here, cheap energy, and data centers can be repurposed. Like AI data centers can be repurposed for really anything. There's a lot of computation power. I think lowering corporate tax is just part of the equation. I don't think it's all of it, but I think it definitely does help attract investment. We have a lot of monopolies here in Canada, like Bell, Rogers, and the telecom industry. They control, I think it's 90% of the telecom sector, and that's just two companies. Compared to the US, I think AT&T, Xfinity, like 3 others control 70%. So it's a big difference there. And I feel like more competition is better for the consumers, obviously. There's monopolies and stuff like airlines, like WestJet, I think controls 60% of all like airline market share. Yeah, I just feel like we need more competition, and lowering corporate tax rates would help a lot with that.
Okay, well, thank you both. We will now move on to a 14-minute question period in which audience members can question the proponents or the opponents, or and open debate where either side can debate each other. I will start with a question to the opponents, and that is, do you think corporate taxes should be raised?
I don't think it should be increased, nor do I think it's fine the way it is. I would argue that we should just focus on closing tax loopholes first and foremost, as we lose a lot that way. Otherwise, I would agree with Rob that we might go far too far onto the Lafferty curve, in that we would stop investment altogether. So I would say keep it as it is, but close tax loopholes.
My initial response was yes, more tax revenues so we get to fund more programs. And my mental example of that was like Japan and Germany. But the only reason I think empirically, and I haven't done any research, this is just me thinking thoughts, is they have a huge reservoir of skills, existing infrastructure for specific industry manufacturing, and companies can't really go anywhere else.
They have massive population as well.
Population as well. And, companies, I guess, really just don't have anywhere else to go when they want specific machinery to be built. So maybe in that case, it's like a specific way they can get away with it. But also on the flip side of that, they have significantly more expensive social programs than we do, purely just based on Rob's point. They have way more people, right? So they also kind of need it too. So the companies can't really go anywhere else, but they also need that extra revenue to fund their program. So, that was my mental sort of justification. And here our biggest industry is mining. Nobody goes anywhere else in the world because Canada is like, we're the best at mining. Canada is where all the industry, all the experience is when it comes to ethical mining. And as much as that is important, it's not as profit, or like there are other countries that also are really good at mining. Versus versus Japan and Germany, where at least off the dome for me, I can't think of any other countries, maybe China, who can produce specifically tooled machinery. So, yeah. My question to you, Rob, is higher corporate taxes, and I suppose we could even throw the carbon tax into this, leads to lower wages and higher costs. So lower wages for employees, higher costs for consumers. Is that a function of the increase in taxes, or is that just corporations protecting their profits?
It's a function of business. It's a proven function of business that we've seen for as long as business has been around. If a business has higher costs, they're going to pass that costs on to whoever they can, whether it's their employees or the consumers. But I think that the adverse is also true, that when businesses have lower costs, we typically see them, in some cases, have a better impetus to pass those along. They're not going to pass along savings when they don't have any. They can only pass along savings when provided some. And so if we want them to pass along savings to their employees, or even lower prices to consumers, that we do need to provide some level of corporate tax reduction.
I would argue that the multinational corporations who quite often operate in Canada can afford to pay that extra dollar on whatever their service or product is. Like, for oil and gas companies, they didn't need to raise the prices of their oil and gas. They just wanted to protect their profit margins. Like Shell, Petro-Canada, all the other gas corporations are escaping my cranium at the moment. But they operate everywhere. Internationally, they're multinational, international corporations, and the Canadian market is only a slim percentage, maybe not slim, but it's only a percentage of their total profits, right? So, and I would argue, like, when corporations have an opportunity to protect their profits and retain, business as usual, because, consistent business is good, they will. And that often, at least in a lot of cases, translates to higher costs and lower wages. But then there's also the relationship between political lobbying and the prices of things. Like when the corporate tax or carbon tax existed in Canada, oil companies worked with the CPC to have that whole acts the tax campaign that Pierre basically wrote on for 2 years. And, traditionally conservative parties are very deeply entwined with resource production and oil and gas companies. So you can't forget the relationship there either. My other question is lowering taxes just like a blunt hammer for a specific problem? If our only goal here is to attract international investment, where are we looking to attract that investment? What industries? What parts of Canada do we want to put those industries into, So if we want to increase, foreign investment in Canada, we should be more specific. And because we are now having specifically outlined goals and tasks, we can analyze whether lowering corporate taxes is an effective tool or not.
I think to address the second point there first, I think it's important to lower the corporate tax rate, at least to match the United States. We cannot have any sort of sustained economic growth while we have both less labor and higher corporate taxes than our direct southern neighbor.
But a lot of the world already does that.
Sorry?
A lot of the world has higher corporate taxes, and either have...
A lot of the world is not in the same position that Canada is. We're directly north of them. We have very similar land. We have very similar access to water. A lot of our situation is similar to the United States, but our taxes is higher and our labor is lower. And so when somebody is coming from far away, right, to come over to North America, they're going to choose the partner that has more labor affordable to them at a lower cost. Whereas we would have the opportunity, and here's where my question's coming in, do you think that it's fair to say that we should have lower tax rates to make up for our labor shortages?
I would need to see data that supports that lower taxes lead to higher hiring rates, because internationally, companies are hiring less and firing more. And they're trying to cut their costs and supplement the work produced by their employees with productive AI, which, by the way, preliminary data.
We're not talking about hiring rates. We're talking about revenue. Hiring rates doesn't really matter. When we're talking about social programs for Canadians, we need more money. We don't need more people necessarily with a job as long as we're getting more money.
Because I guess I completely misunderstood it. That's my fault.
Yeah, sorry. So what I'm saying is, like, we have a labor shortage. So is it a fair economic tool to provide tax revenue shortages or lowering our tax rate to attract more people to make up for the fact that we have low labor?
Is that low labor due to not enough people working or not enough companies hiring?
Not enough populace. We only have 38 million people compared to a lot of the countries that you mentioned, Germany, Japan, the United States. They all have double, triple, or 10x our population. So we need to make up for that with tax shortages.
I would disagree with that. We don't have enough people working, because currently 1 in 5 Canadian youth are unemployed. And I'll tell you, based off my own personal experience, in the last year, I've submitted my resume to over 200 companies, and I've gotten 7 interviews, and I got hired twice. So companies aren't hiring, and they're replacing workers, real life human people, with AI. And that's just a fact. So I don't think lowering corporate taxes is an effective tool to have more people in our workforce.
But is it a more effective tool to generate revenue to pay for social programs, which is also part of this discussion?
I would need to see hard and fast proof that, or at least very accurate projections that, and like confirmed statements from thousands or hundreds of international companies that say, hey, if you do this, we will put in money. And I would need to see the government systems and financial models in place that will guarantee that outcome. Because just having it happening and hoping that fate will fall a certain way is a really bad strategy. So if there was a basically guaranteed way to ensure that, sure. But letting the chips fall and seeing what happens is a bad strategy.
Go ahead, Nathan.
Right. So going on that, our tax revenue has increased since, say, 1992. So our tax revenue has gone up because we've had more investment when lowering tax rates. Yet our social spending, social programs, military spending have all declined rapidly despite this increase in corporate tax revenue by increased investment. So I'm just wondering.
I think there's a combination of factors here, right? So the what also goes along with this is social programs have gotten significantly more expensive over that same period. So if you were to pull up a graph of the cost of social programs, I think it would actually look more dramatic than the period that of a gain in the period that you're looking at. And those are specifically in old age care. The cost for old age care over the last 3 to 5 decades has quadrupled. And so we're seeing the highest cost for social programs across the board, not only in that, also in welfare, because there's higher populations everywhere. We're seeing more homelessness because there's higher populations everywhere. We're seeing higher costs in healthcare because there's more people get more sick and pass on more diseases to more people, and more people get more sick. So I agree with what you're saying, but social program costs has outpaced the growth in the Canadian economy for corporate tax revenues. And I think that if those two were to be reversed, if we had more corporate tax revenues by having less corporate taxes, then we could actually pay for those social programs more effectively.
But let's just make sure that we all want to retain the fact that we can pay for these social programs, right?
Exactly, but we need the money to do so.
Right. And so your argument is by lowering taxes will increase the investment, that even though the taxes are lower, it'll actually increase the amount of revenue, tax revenue.
And that's provable through many, many examples in history, yes.
Cool. Yeah. I have a question for Alistair.
Yeah.
How would you balance and this is based on our running sort of questions on AI, how would you balance the high electrical costs for running AI data centers and the very high fresh water use in probably more rural areas with economic growth due to those AI data centers?
Can you elaborate on?
Sure. So AI data centers use an enormous amount of energy, electricity specifically. And in the areas that AI data centers exist, residents have noticed an increase in their electrical bill. It probably varies based on region, but an increase is still an increase, right? It's a problem. Not to mention that in some of the places in the United States where these data centers operate due to just naturally low electrical costs that usually associate with more rural areas, or at least, on the bordering edge of suburban, their water bills have also skyrocketed, because I'm sure we've all seen the numbers so far that each ChatGPT uses 500 question uses like 500 milliliters of water that just gets evaporated or used or contaminated that isn't recoverable in various functions. So how would you balance the high electrical costs and the high fresh water use with the economic growth due to AI?
Sorry, Alistair, do you mind if I jump in and address some of that?
Sure.
While you think of something? Okay, so I want to address a few things. First of all, the water use it absolutely is recoverable. What happens is it gets turned into condensation, which goes into our atmosphere. It gets rained down through entropy. We don't lose any water. The water that we have on Earth is the same water that we've had at the time of the dinosaurs, right? Water doesn't go anywhere. It stays in our environment. It just gets recycled into our environment. So that's the first thing on there. Secondly,
can I add on to that real quick?
Oh, sorry, jump in, Alistair.
Yeah, I just want to say the 500 milliliters per water, I've seen that stated. It's a lot less than what they thought it was. I think it's like one ChatGPT query uses less water than 5 Google searches or something. So it seems like a lot, but when you really look at it, it's not a lot. Even on a grand scale, it's not as much as we use every day using like Google or just the web. So it is a lot less.
And I also want to add on top of that on the other side. So you kind of hit on a perfect thing for Canada, right? You mentioned you mentioned the land use, you mentioned energy, and you mentioned fresh water, right? Those are the things. Canada doesn't have labor, as we've previously discussed. Those are the things that Canada has in abundance. Canada has fresh water in abundance more than most nations. I think we actually have technically the most fresh water of any nation in the entire world. Canada has some of the cheapest energy in the world, and we have tons and tons of land to build data centers on. We actually are the prime target for foreign investment for data centers if we had a better tax rate. And if we did, those investments that you're seeing in the United States, you would see here. And then lastly, on your third point, the comments that you made about raised energy costs, I believe those are US statistics, not Canadian statistics. And that actually has to do with the way that energy is measured in the US versus Canada, I believe that Canadian residential would not be affected by corporate energy use in data centers because it's actually priced differently and charged differently. So if there's a data center in your city, your personal residential energy price wouldn't go up.
That's okay. So
Hey, just take 30 seconds to respond, okay? Just so we can move on.
Okay. With the fresh water use, it does increase the costs of fresh water for the residents in that area that the data center operates in, because there's less available. Fine, even if it's recycled within the system, building more data centers is going to ultimately use more water, even if it is recycled. Yes, we do have cheap energy, 100%. BC, tons of hydro. Ontario, tons of hydro. But in the flat parts of the country, oil and gas is kind of the major energy source. We're using, planet-killing sort of technology that's super old to power these data centers. And yeah, we definitely do have good land. Totally true. And I had another point, but we also have to consider, like, what are these data centers being used for? In a lot of cases, these data centers are being used for ethically not great activities. And I'll finish that statement after.
Okay, great. Thank you. And now we will move on to closing statements. We will begin with the opponents, and they will have 4 minutes to close.
In conclusion, while I see where Rob is coming from, and Alistair as well, I ultimately feel we can't justify reducing our corporate tax rate. While the US has far lower and can attract more investment, the social good on the US from that increased investment has been questionable. US Gini score, which is inequality, is far 10 points, I think, higher, 13. So there's a clear sense of inequality in the US that's increasing despite increased investment and so on. So I don't want Canadians to suffer in the long term by reducing corporate taxes, hurting our social programs, reducing our state's ability to function, which in turn leads to loss of faith in our government. And I'll hand that over to Joshua.
Yeah, again, I hesitate to even consider lowering the corporate tax rate. And if we want to increase Canada's GDP and our business value, the value of all our businesses and productivity and all that other things, there are more tools in our toolbox than just lowering the corporate tax rate. And I would suggest and even state that in summation of all the tools that we have and the effectiveness, corporate taxes, the effectiveness scale is super duper low versus the summation of all the rest of the tools is obviously significantly higher. So when it comes to what we can and can't do, we should be doing the things that have a higher potential for impact. We don't need more foreign ownership of our natural resources, our major national products. That's something that I think our current government, the Carney's government, is totally just screwing up on so many different levels. With my example, and I'll use it again, is the Kitimat LNG project. And I could list dozens of other projects nationally that are extracting literal billions of dollars out of our pockets and just going to other parts of the world. Those are our natural resources. Those are our land, and we should be reaping the profits from that, not another country. And then also, if we want to increase the money we have for social programs, sure, I totally see your point, and I 100% see the logic of decreased corporate tax increases foreign investment more, which leads to a greater, amount of money for us to spend on our social programs and government functions in general. If we really, really, really cared about trying to increase our, federal tax revenue to fund our government, the first thing we need to do is close the corporate tax loopholes 100%. And so at the end of the day, we should only try lowering our corporate tax rate after we've tried everything else. And I don't think I have anything else. So I will pass it off to the proponents.
Hey, great. So now we will move on to a 4-minute closing statement by the proponents. Go ahead.
Canada stands at a crossroads. We can cling to a high-tax, low-growth model, or we can spark a new era of competitiveness and confidence. Lowering corporate taxes doesn't mean abandoning fairness. It means fueling the investment that creates prosperity that we want to share. It's not theory. It's proven economics. When businesses invest, workers thrive, wages rise, and revenues grow. Every great Canadian social program, from healthcare to education, depends on a thriving private sector beneath it. Let's rebuild that foundation. Let's relight the fire of competitiveness in Canada. Choose growth, choose investment, choose Canada. And I'll pass it on to Alistair.
Yeah, like Joshua said, I think closing the loopholes, the tax loopholes, is probably the most important thing we have to do right now. But lowering the corporate tax, that not only will it help companies grow here, it also just looks good on paper. I feel like, yeah, it looks good on paper. But it's a piece of a much bigger puzzle than that, and I just think it's something that could help, and that's about it.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And yes, see you all in the next debate.
Thank you for watching this debate from the CFP Youth. Please like and subscribe for more, and come chat with us on Discord.